My pilot's son shouted in front of the whole terminal, "She's on my flight." His voice echoed through the airport, sharp, panicked, cutting through the hum of announcements and the shuffle of rolling suitcases. And yet I was standing right there. For a moment, time froze. Passengers turned their eyes, bouncing from me to Daniel, then back again as if they were watching a cruel trick of light. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might break through my chest. The smell of jet fuel mixed with coffee from the kiosks, the flicker of departure screens glowing blue, the buzz of cell phones, all of it blurred into a single dizzying moment. Daniel, my son, was in full uniform, cap, jacket, polished shoes. The child I once carried in my arms, now a man trusted with hundreds of lives in the sky, stood trembling like a boy again. His hand gripped the edge of the counter so hard his knuckles turned white. She's on board," he stammered to the flight attendant, his eyes darting to the boarding list. "Her passport, her seat, her face, it's her. But my mother is right here." I felt a chill run up my spine. The way strangers looked at me, some with pity, others with suspicion, made me want to shrink into the ground. Had the world gone mad, or had I? The loudspeaker announced boarding for Flight 709 to Paris. I clenched my handbag tighter, the leather biting into my palm. In that instant, I understood something was deeply wrong. But before I can tell you why I was even there at that very airport, let me take you back to the days leading up to this moment. Days filled with whispers, slammed doors, and the kind of silence that cuts deeper than words. I am Elizabeth Carter, 62 years old, a widow for almost a decade. Once my home was filled with laughter, the scent of Ernest's pipe smoke, the weight of family dinners that stretched long into the night. But when he passed, it was Daniel who carried my pride. My son, the pilot. The boy who had once lined up paper airplanes in our backyard and whispered, "One day I'll fly the real ones." I had believed in that dream more than I had believed in my own breath. I worked double shifts at the diner, put away every spare dollar, all so he could go to aviation school. And he made it. The whole town boasted of him, Elizabeth's son, the pilot, they'd say, and my heart swelled every time. But when Daniel married Sophia, everything shifted. Sophia was beautiful, yes, refined, the kind of woman who carried herself like she belonged on magazine covers. Yet her smile never reached her eyes when she looked at me. The first time she shook my hand, it was cold, firm, as if she were sealing a contract rather than greeting family. "Daniel," she once whispered, not knowing I was within earshot, "your mother clings too much. We need space." Space. A word that sliced deeper than any insult. From that day forward, Sophia's presence lingered in my home like a shadow I could not chase away. She smiled in front of neighbors, but inside our walls, her words cut sharp. "Why should your mother attend every family dinner, Daniel? She's not the center of this house." I would pretend not to hear. I would excuse myself to the kitchen, letting the clatter of pots and the hiss of the kettle drown the sting. But silence cannot cover everything. Silence only amplifies the truth. Daniel changed. My boy, who once called me every evening after landing just to say "I'm safe, Mom," now barely texted. When I did hear his voice, it was shorter, clipped, like he was always rushing. It wasn't just his schedule. It was distance. A distance Sophia carved between us with a scalpel of whispers. One afternoon, I dialed Daniel's number after not hearing from him for weeks. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. My chest tightened as though someone had bound it with rope. Finally, in frustration, I borrowed my neighbor's phone. This time, he picked up instantly. "Mom, why are you calling from this number?" he asked, his voice startled. "I tried calling you all week," I said, my throat dry. There was a pause. Then quietly, "Maybe Sophia blocked your number by mistake." By mistake. The words were acid. I hung up with a trembling hand, realizing my only son could no longer hear me unless his wife allowed it. That evening I sat at my kitchen table staring at the family photo on the wall, Daniel in his crisp pilot uniform, Sophia clinging to his arm, and me smiling in the background like an afterthought. My chest ached. Days later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address. I opened it to find a card, an invitation for a family celebration. But it wasn't addressed to me. My name was nowhere, only theirs. I went to their apartment, knocking until my knuckles hurt. The rooms were dark, the curtains drawn, empty. I was about to leave when a draft from the hallway blew open a desk drawer. Inside, a folded piece of paper caught my eye. It was a boarding pass, my name printed in bold, Elizabeth Carter, destination Paris. But I had never booked a flight. My hands shook as I held that ticket, its edges cutting into my skin like proof of some cruel plan. Why would my name be on it? Why would Sophia hide this from me? I pressed the pass against my chest, my pulse hammering. Deep down I knew this was no mistake. Someone was trying to erase me, to replace me. That night I couldn't sleep. The boarding pass lay on my nightstand, its white paper glowing under the dim lamp like an accusation. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my own name staring back at me, stamped with a flight I never booked. What did Sophia want with my identity? Why Paris? Why now? I remembered her words from months ago, sharp as broken glass. Daniel, if your mother becomes a burden, there are solutions. Solutions. At the time, I thought it was just cruelty, words flung in a moment of temper. But now, holding that ticket, I wondered if she had been laying a plan all along. By dawn, I made a decision. I would go to the airport. If they wanted me erased, I would stand in the very place they thought I wouldn't. I would confront whatever trick lay waiting. The airport buzzed with life that morning, families hugging goodbye, businessmen glued to their phones, children tugging on stuffed animals. I moved among them, clutching my handbag, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out the announcements overhead. I reached the departure gate, and then I saw him. Daniel, my son, standing tall in his pilot uniform, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the passenger list on the screen. He looked up, and then he saw me. His face drained of color, his mouth opened as if he had seen a ghost. And then came the shout, the words that would make the whole terminal freeze. "She's on my flight." Every head turned. A ripple of confusion swept the waiting area. Passengers whispered, eyes darting between me and the gate. I clutched my bag tighter. "Daniel, what do you mean I'm right here?" I cried. He shook his head violently, gripping the counter. "No, Mom, her passport is in the system. She boarded. She's sitting in first class. But you," his voice cracked, "you're standing right here." My knees weakened. A cold sweat broke over me. For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. The flight attendant glanced between us, bewildered. "Captain Carter, are you saying this passenger is duplicated?" The word hung in the air, duplicated. My skin crawled. Around us, strangers leaned closer, hungry for the spectacle. A woman muttered, "Maybe the old lady is confused." Another hissed, "Or maybe she's lying." The sting of their doubt burned worse than fire, and in that suffocating moment, one truth thundered in my mind. Someone was living my life while I stood there watching. After that humiliating scene at the airport, the world must have thought I was losing my mind. But let me take you back, because the seeds of this nightmare had been planted long before that day. I am Elizabeth Carter, 62, widow, mother of one son who became my pride and joy, and of a daughter-in-law who slowly turned that pride into ashes. When my husband Ernest died, Daniel was still in training. I poured every ounce of my love, every dollar I earned from the diner, into helping him graduate. When he finally pinned on his wings, the neighbors celebrated as if we'd all risen with him. "Elizabeth's boy is flying the skies," they cheered, and my heart swelled with gratitude. Then came Sophia. She was stunning, like someone who had stepped out of an expensive magazine. Her hair always perfect, her words honeyed in public, but behind closed doors her smile carried frost. At first I tried to believe my worries were just jealousy, the kind mothers sometimes feel when another woman becomes the center of their son's world. But it wasn't jealousy, it was instinct. Sophia never called me Mom. She called me Elizabeth, with the kind of politeness that cut deeper than insults. Whenever I entered a room, her eyes flicked to Daniel as if to remind him where his loyalty should lie. One evening at a family dinner, I reached to pour Daniel some tea. Sophia's hand darted out, covering his cup. "He doesn't drink that late, Elizabeth," she said sweetly. I froze. Daniel said nothing, his eyes fixed on his plate. The silence was louder than any argument. The cracks widened slowly but surely. Phone calls grew shorter. Visits became rare. When I dropped by, Sophia would sigh as though my presence were a chore. Once I overheard her whisper in the kitchen, not realizing I had returned early. "Daniel, your mother clings too much. She needs to understand this is our house now. Do you want to live for her or for us?" I stood in the hallway, my hand over my mouth, my heart pounding like a drum. Daniel's reply was a soft murmur I couldn't catch, but I knew enough my place in his life was shrinking, and yet I endured. Because he was my son. Because sometimes a mother's silence feels like the only way to hold a family together, but silence can also be the soil where betrayal grows. The weeks rolled by, and every day I felt the walls of my own family closing in around me. It wasn't just Sophia's words anymore, it was the little details, the kind that outsiders would never notice but a mother could never ignore. When I called Daniel, the line often went dead after one ring. At first I thought it was the poor signal near the airbase, but one afternoon I borrowed my neighbor's phone. The moment Daniel heard my voice, he gasped, "Mom, why didn't you call from your number?" "I did," I whispered, "but you never answer." There was a pause followed by a weak excuse. Maybe Sophia changed some settings by mistake. By mistake? How many mistakes add up to a decision? Another time I found out through a cousin, not through Daniel, that there had been a family dinner. Everyone was invited. Everyone except me. The excuse they had forgotten to send me the message. Forgotten, as though 62 years of sacrifice could be misplaced like a grocery list. I sat alone that night with a plate of food turning cold in front of me. The clink of my fork echoed in an empty kitchen that once rang with laughter. I remembered the days when Daniel was a boy, when he would beg me to sit by his side while he studied flight manuals. "I can't do this without you, Mom," he used to say. Now he couldn't even pick up the phone. And Sophia's eyes, oh those eyes. Whenever she did look at me, they carried something colder than anger. Contempt. The kind that doesn't need words to wound. One Sunday morning I went to their apartment unannounced. The curtains were drawn, though the sun was bright and the air smelled faintly of perfume, expensive, suffocating. I knocked, but no one answered. As I turned to leave, a gust of air rattled the half-open desk drawer near the hallway. Something inside fluttered. I shouldn't have looked. I tell myself that even now. But my hand moved before my conscience could stop it. Inside lay an envelope. I pulled it free, and there, crisp and unmistakable, was a boarding pass. My name, Elizabeth Carter. Destination, Paris. Departure the end of the month. I froze. My chest tightened until breathing hurt. Why would Sophia hold a ticket in my name? Why Paris? Why without my knowing? The edges of the paper dug into my palm as if to remind me this was no accident. This was a message, a trap waiting to be sprung. I stood frozen in that silent apartment, the boarding pass trembling between my fingers. My name printed in bold letters, as if someone had carved it into stone. Elizabeth Carter, passenger. My first thought was a cruel one. Were they planning to send me away? The idea struck like lightning. I could almost hear Sophia's voice echoing in my ears. "Your mother doesn't belong in our plans, Daniel. She'll only hold us back." The air around me thickened. My knees weakened. For a moment, I had to grip the edge of the desk, just to keep from collapsing. I pressed the pass against my chest as if it were proof of my own existence. But what was it really? A ticket to freedom or a ticket to oblivion? The sound of footsteps in the hallway snapped me back. My heart lurched. Quickly, I slipped the pass into my handbag and closed the drawer as quietly as I could. The lock clicked shut just as the door opened. Sophia entered, her heels tapping across the floor like a judge's gavel. She carried grocery bags, her lips painted a sharp red, her smile too perfect. "Oh, Elizabeth," she said lightly as though surprised. "You should have told us you were visiting. Daniel's not home." Her eyes scanned me cold and precise. Did she know I had found it? "I was just passing by," I replied, forcing a weak smile. My throat was dry as sand. She placed the bags down and began humming softly, arranging vegetables on the counter. To anyone else, it might have looked ordinary. But I saw the way her hands trembled ever so slightly, the way her gaze flickered to my handbag. In that moment, I knew this was no coincidence. I left quickly, murmuring an excuse. Outside, the air felt sharper, the sunlight too bright. I walked down the street, clutching my bag, every step heavier than the last. The city bustled around me, but inside I was trapped in a cage of dread. That night back home, I laid the boarding pass on my kitchen table. The paper glowed under the yellow lamplight. My reflection in the window stared back at me, older, more fragile than ever. I whispered into the empty room, "They want to erase me." My voice cracked, the words sounding like a confession and a warning all at once. From that night on, I began to watch Sophia more closely. The way she smiled too wide, the way Daniel avoided my eyes, the way neighbors mentioned strange comings and goings when I wasn't around. The ticket was only the beginning. And deep in my bones, I knew the storm was coming. The boarding pass never left my sight. I carried it tucked deep inside my handbag as though it were both a curse and a shield. Every time I touched the leather, I felt its edges pressing against my palm, reminding me that something far darker than loneliness was at play. From that day on, I began to notice things I had once brushed aside. When I visited Daniel's apartment, Sophia would linger near the door as though guarding it, her smile stiff, her hands crossed in front of her. "Elizabeth," she would say, her voice laced with false sweetness, "you really should call before coming. We have schedules. The word echoed with the same coldness as the boarding pass. Daniel, once my boy, who used to hug me so tightly I could barely breathe now, stood at a distance, his arms folded, his eyes darting nervously between his wife and me. I wanted to reach for him to touch his cheek like when he was small, but he flinched almost imperceptibly, as if even my love embarrassed him now. And then there were the whispers. One afternoon, as I stepped into the kitchen to fetch some water, I heard them in the next room. Sophia's voice sharp as glass. "If she keeps snooping, we'll have to move things forward. Move things forward." The phrase froze my blood. Daniel's reply came low, muffled, but I caught the tremor. "She's still my mother." A chair scraped, a door closed. Silence. I pressed my back against the wall, my breath shallow. Was I imagining things, or had I just overheard the blueprint of my own erasure? The more I looked, the more the cracks showed. Sophia sometimes wore the same white blouse I had seen on the passenger list photo Daniel once showed me. Her perfume lingered in strange places, the back of my own church pew, the pharmacy aisle where I shopped every week, and neighbors began to mention glimpses of her with men I didn't know, stepping into cars that weren't Daniel's. But the cruelest wound came from Daniel himself. One evening I called him again, desperate for a shred of closeness. The line rang once, then silence. At last his voice came distant, strained. "Mom, please, stop making things harder." Harder. My hands trembled as I held the phone. "Daniel, what do you mean harder? I'm your mother." But he only sighed. "Sophia says you've been confused. Maybe you should rest more." Confused. The word stung like poison. After that phone call, I sat in my kitchen staring at the faded wallpaper until the patterns swirled like ghosts. "Confused," he said. The word echoed until it lodged itself in my bones. Sophia had planted it there whisper by whisper until my own son repeated it back to me like a verdict. But I wasn't confused. I knew what I saw. I knew what I held in my hands. And yet the world around me began to shift as if conspiring to prove I was losing my mind. At the grocery store, a neighbor patted my shoulder gently. "Elizabeth, are you all right? Sophia told me you've been forgetful lately. You should take care of yourself." I forced a smile, though my throat burned. Forgetful, I had never once forgotten the names of her grandchildren, the hymns at church, the recipes passed down from my mother, but suddenly I was being rewritten as a fragile woman slipping away from reality. Another time at church I caught whispers behind me. "They say she wanders, looks for things that aren't there." I turned, but the eyes that met mine quickly looked away, pitying. It was Sophia's work, I knew it. She wasn't content to push me from Daniel's life. She wanted me erased from the community too, my credibility shredded so that when the real betrayal surfaced, no one would believe me. The final blow came at a family dinner. Daniel had invited me, perhaps out of guilt. I brought a homemade pie, hoping to bridge the distance with something as simple as sweetness. But when I arrived, Sophia stood at the doorway, her arms folded. "Oh, Elizabeth," she said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes, "we didn't think you'd actually remember the time." Her words drew chuckles from two of Daniel's colleagues seated nearby. My cheeks burned. I wanted to protest, to say I had arrived precisely on time, but the laughter drowned me out. Daniel reached for my pie, his voice soft, almost embarrassed. "Mom, maybe just sit down. Don't overdo it. Overdo it." As though my very presence was an excess, a burden. I sat at the table, the pie untouched, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Around me the chatter flowed, but I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of my own family. And across the table, Sophia's eyes glinted with quiet triumph. The dinner dragged on, but every bite tasted like ash. I sat in silence while Sophia's laughter rang like polished silver, smooth and sharp, meant to slice. She leaned across the table, pouring wine for Daniel's friends, her voice sweet as honey. But when her gaze flicked to me, it was laced with venom. At one point, one of the guests turned to me politely. "So, Mrs. Carter, have you been traveling much lately?" Before I could answer, Sophia's voice cut in, casual yet lethal. "Oh, Elizabeth doesn't travel. It's far too complicated for her now. She gets mixed up." The table erupted in knowing chuckles as if she had shared a light-hearted joke. My cheeks flushed, hot then cold. I wanted to shout, wanted to slam the boarding pass on the table as proof that someone was plotting to send me away, but Daniel's hand touched my arm lightly. "Mom," he whispered, "please, not tonight. Not tonight." As though my dignity had an expiration date. I swallowed the words, each one burning in my throat, and lowered my gaze to the plate in front of me. My pie sat untouched, its crust golden and perfect, but no one asked for a slice. When the evening finally ended, I stood on the porch as they said their goodbyes. Sophia kissed Daniel's cheek, her arm looped possessively through his. She turned back toward me with a smile sharpened to a blade. "Take care, Elizabeth. Don't get lost on the way home." Her words were soft enough that only I could hear them. They landed heavier than any shouted insult. I walked home through the quiet streets, the night air biting at my skin. My hands trembled as I unlocked the door, stepping into the silence of my kitchen. The boarding pass lay hidden where I'd kept it, glowing faintly in the lamplight, as though mocking me. I knew then Sophia wasn't merely trying to humiliate me. She was building a case brick by brick to paint me as unstable, to make the world believe that whatever happened next was nothing more than the ramblings of a confused old woman. But I was not confused. I was not lost. And if they thought they could erase me, they were about to learn just how dangerous a mother can be when cornered. The night after that dinner, I sat alone at my kitchen table, the silence around me so heavy it felt like another presence. In the center of the table lay the boarding pass, its sharp edges curling slightly under the lamplight. I had stared at it for hours, memorizing every detail. Passenger Elizabeth Carter, Flight 709, destination Paris, date Saturday. Saturday, just 3 days away. My fingers traced the ink as though it were carved into my own skin. Every letter of my name felt like a nail hammered into my coffin. I whispered to myself, what are they planning for me? The shadows in the room seemed to lean closer, listening. The next morning, I carried the pass to the small travel agency 2 blocks from my house. The young clerk behind the desk greeted me with a professional smile, her nails painted a shade of crimson too bright for the dim office. "Could you check this for me?" I asked, sliding the ticket across the counter. My hands trembled so badly the paper rattled. She typed quickly, her eyes scanning the screen, then her brow furrowed. "This ticket is valid, Mrs. Carter. Paid in full. Seat 3 amperes first class." My heart sank. "Paid by whom?" She shook her head. "The system doesn't show the cardholder's name, only that it was processed online." I clutched the counter, the chill of the laminate biting into my palms. My own son hadn't bought it. That much I knew. Daniel barely remembered to call me anymore, much less purchase a luxury ticket, which left only one possibility: Sophia. When I returned home, I placed the boarding pass back on the table and stared at it until my eyes blurred. The clock ticked loudly in the corner, each second sounding like a countdown. That evening, Daniel came by. His uniform still crisp from a short-haul flight, his face weary but handsome. I longed to embrace him, to press my cheek against his chest the way I had when he was a boy. Instead, he stood in the doorway, his hand resting lightly on the frame as though ready to leave again. "Mom," he said softly, "Sophia told me you've been worried lately. Maybe you should take a trip. Clear your head. A trip." The words hit me like thunder, and I knew then the ticket wasn't an accident. It was an alibi, a way to move me like a pawn on their board. That night I could no longer hold back. The boarding pass burned inside my handbag like a live coal. I walked to Daniel and Sophia's apartment, every step heavy with the weight of 1,000 questions. Sophia opened the door. She looked immaculate as always, silk blouse, hair swept up, perfume thick and cloying. Her lips curved into a smile that never reached her eyes. "Elizabeth, what a surprise!" I stepped inside without asking, clutching the handbag against me. My heart pounded so loudly I thought the walls could hear it. Daniel wasn't home. It was just the 2 of us. I placed the boarding pass on the table between us. The paper lay there like a weapon. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my voice trembling but sharp. Sophia glanced at it. For a moment her expression flickered, something quick and dark gone before I could catch it. Then she laughed, soft and cruel. "Oh, Elizabeth, you must have gotten confused. That's probably from years ago. You know how memory plays tricks." "No," I said firmly, slamming my palm against the table. "This flight is in 3 days. My name, my seat, first class." "Who paid for it?" Her eyes gleamed cold as polished steel. "Why are you so worried? Maybe Daniel thought you deserved a trip. Maybe someone is finally doing you a favor." "A favor," my voice cracked. "To send me away, without telling me." Sophia leaned forward, her perfume suffocating her words, a whisper meant to wound. "Or maybe you're just tired, Elizabeth. Maybe you're seeing things that aren't really there." I felt the blood rush to my cheeks. Rage, shame, fear, all boiling inside me. I wanted to scream, to shake her until the mask fell off her face. But just then the front door opened. Daniel stepped in, his cap tucked under his arm. "Mom," he asked, startled to see me. Sophia straightened instantly, slipping back into her role as the dutiful wife. She touched his arm, her voice honey-sweet. "Your mother is upset, darling. She found an old ticket and thought it was for her. She's been confused." Daniel's eyes softened with pity, not for Sophia, not for the situation, but for me. "Mom," he said gently, as though soothing a child, "why don't you let us handle things? You shouldn't stress yourself like this." I stood frozen, my mouth open, my dignity collapsing in the space between us. Sophia's victory glimmered in her smile, and in that moment I understood the real humiliation wasn't in strangers doubting me. It was in watching my son believe her lies over my truth. I left their apartment with the boarding pass clenched in my fist so tightly it crumpled the paper damp with the sweat of my palms. My steps echoed down the hallway, each one heavier than the last, as if I carried the weight of betrayal on my back. Outside, the night air was sharp, cutting against my cheeks. Streetlights flickered over empty sidewalks, and I walked alone, my heart hollow yet burning. Sophia's words rang in my ears, confused, tired, old. And worse than her cruelty was Daniel's silence. My son had looked at me with pity, not trust. I unlocked my door and stepped into the stillness of my kitchen. The clock ticked on the wall, indifferent to the ruin unraveling in my life. I spread the boarding pass out on the table once more, smoothing the wrinkles as though it were a piece of sacred scripture. "They want me erased," I whispered, "but they will not succeed." That night I could not sleep. I sat at the window watching the stars, my hands trembling around a cup of cold tea. Every creak of the house made me start, every shadow seemed to move. And through it all the thought circled endlessly. In 3 days someone will try to take my place. By dawn I had made my decision. If the world refused to believe me, I would gather proof myself. On the morning of the flight, I dressed carefully. Dark skirt, pressed blouse, my late husband Ernest's locket resting against my collarbone. I packed nothing. I wasn't leaving. I was going to fight. When I arrived at the airport, the terminal buzzed with life. Rolling suitcases clicked across the polished floor, the smell of coffee mingled with jet fuel announcements echoed in tinny voices overhead. I clutched my handbag, the boarding pass tucked safely inside, and moved through the sea of strangers. And then I saw him, Daniel. My son, my pride, standing tall in his captain's uniform. His cap gleamed, his shoes polished, but his face was pale, his jaw tight. He scanned the passenger list, his eyes darting back and forth until suddenly they froze. His lips parted, his chest heaved. And then before the crowd, his voice rang out, breaking the hum of the terminal like thunder. "She's on my flight." The words cut through the air, turning every head toward me. And in that moment I understood the battle was no longer just within my home. It had begun here under the harsh lights of the airport with the whole world watching. "She's on my flight," Daniel's voice cracked like lightning across the terminal. For a heartbeat, the entire airport froze. Passengers stopped, mid-stride coffee cups paused halfway to lips, the rolling of suitcases halted. Dozens of eyes swung toward me, an aging woman clutching a handbag to her chest, as though I were the answer to some impossible riddle. I stood rooted to the polished floor, the glare of fluorescent lights stinging my eyes. The departure board flickered overhead, letters shifting, announcing destinations I could barely hear. All I heard was my son's voice echoing, repeating, carrying disbelief. "She's already boarded. She's in first-class seat 3 amperes. But my mother is standing right here," gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers rose like a storm. Is this some kind of trick? 2 women with the same name? Maybe she's lying. The sting of their suspicion burned hotter than fire. My throat closed, but I forced my voice through the weight of humiliation. "Daniel, look at me. It's your mother. I never booked this flight. Someone is using my name." But Daniel's face was pale, his jaw trembling. He turned to the flight attendant, desperate. "Check again." "Scan the list." "She boarded, I saw her." The attendant's brows knitted. She tapped rapidly on the screen, then nodded with confusion. "Yes, Captain Carter. Passenger Elizabeth Carter. Seat confirmed." The crowd erupted with a murmur of shock. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. My knees nearly buckled, but I clung to the counter. A businessman in a gray suit muttered loudly enough for others to hear. Poor woman. Probably confused. Shouldn't be traveling alone. A young girl tugged her mother's hand. "Mommy, how can there be 2 grandmas with the same name?" Their voices stabbed at me, each one stripping away pieces of my dignity. I reached into my bag with shaking hands and pulled out the crumpled boarding pass. I slammed it onto the counter. "This was planted. Someone is trying to erase me. You must believe me." But the attendant only glanced at it, then back at me with polite pity. "Ma'am, maybe you should calm down. Security can assist you." Calm down." The words cut deeper than knives. I turned to Daniel, my eyes burning with tears. "Son, please. You know me. You raised your dreams on my shoulders. Do you really believe I'm confused?" Daniel's lips parted, but no sound came. His silence was the loudest betrayal of all. 2 uniformed security officers approached their radios, crackling. The crowd parted for them like water, but their eyes stayed glued to me, this trembling woman clutching her handbag as though it were a lifeline. "Ma'am," one officer said firmly, "we need you to step aside. I haven't done anything." I protested, my voice rising higher than I intended. "That ticket was created in my name without my knowledge. I am not the one on that plane." Whispers swelled like a tide around us. "She looks unstable. Maybe she sneaked in. Could she be dangerous?" Each word struck like a stone. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his voice breaking. "She's my mother. There must be some mistake." The officer nodded but did not soften. "Sir, our records show Mrs. Elizabeth Carter already boarded this flight. If this woman is also claiming to be her, then we need to investigate immediately." The room tilted. For a moment I feared I might collapse right there in front of everyone. A lifetime of dignity reduced to suspicion, a name I had carried with pride now turned against me like a weapon. They led me toward a side area near the glass wall overlooking the runway. Passengers craned their necks, phones raised some recording. My shame was no longer private, it had become a spectacle, and then through the glass I saw her, boarding bridge row of passengers moving in single file. A woman with dark hair tucked neatly under a hat, a white blouse I knew too well, and a leather purse identical to mine. She handed her ticket to the stewardess and smiled faintly. My breath caught. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't a reflection. It was her. "She's right there," I cried, slamming my palm against the glass. "That's the imposter. That's the one pretending to be me." The officers exchanged glances. One raised his radio. "Confirm passenger 3 amperes. We may have a duplication issue." But the attendant at the gate only frowned. She passed security with valid ID and boarding pass. "Everything checks out. Valid ID." The words chilled me. Someone had my face, my papers, my life. I pressed my forehead to the glass, tears blurring my vision. Beyond the barrier, the other me turned her head slightly, just enough for our eyes to almost meet. A flicker of recognition or perhaps mockery passed across her features. Then she disappeared down the jet bridge, vanishing into the plane that carried my name. My palms were flat against the glass, my tears smearing the reflection. On the other side, the woman, my double, was gone, swallowed by the jet bridge. "She's there," I shouted, turning to the officers, to the passengers, to anyone who would listen. "That's not me. Someone is stealing my life." But the more I pleaded, the more their faces hardened. A young man raised his phone, recording me as though I were a street performance. "Look at her," he whispered to his friend, loud enough for me to hear. "Crazy old lady thinks she's being replaced." The word crazy hit me like a slap. The crowd chuckled. Some shook their heads, others pitied me. None believed. "Ma'am," the officer repeated, his tone clipped, "you need to calm down. Calm down. Always calm down. When your dignity is stripped, when your own child doubts you, when a stranger walks away with your name, how do you stay calm?" I turned to Daniel, desperate. "Son, please. You grew up in my arms. Do you not see me? Do you not know me?" His lips trembled, but then he looked away. The silence carved me open. And then from the corner of my eye, I caught it, Sophia, standing near the far gate with her arms folded, pretending to be just another traveler. Her face pale, her eyes darting toward me, then quickly away. It was only a flicker, but I knew. She knew. Her gaze held the tiniest trace of panic, quickly masked by a cold smirk when she realized I had spotted her. She lifted her chin as if daring me to accuse her. I opened my mouth to scream her name, to drag her into the fire of truth, but the officer's hand closed on my arm. "That's enough, ma'am." The crowd was buzzing now, snapping photos, whispering. A few clapped as though the spectacle had ended, as though I had been the entertainment. My heart hammered, rage and humiliation burning through me, yet I forced myself to steady my voice. "You can laugh," I said, my throat raw. "You can doubt. But the truth has boarded that plane, and one day it will land right here at your feet." The officer's grip tightened. Daniel lowered his head. Sophia vanished into the crowd like smoke. And I knew then this was no longer just humiliation. This was war. When I left the airport that night, I carried more than just a handbag. I carried the weight of shame. The sting of whispers followed me all the way home, clinging to my clothes like smoke. Neighbors had already heard. News travels faster than planes in a small town. By the time I reached my street, Mrs. Lambert from across the way was peeking through her curtains. Her eyes flicked toward me then, away as if I were contagious. The next morning I stepped outside to water the roses Ernest had planted years ago. Mr. Collins, my old neighbor, paused as he passed with his dog. "Elizabeth," he said gently, "people are saying you caused a scene at the airport. Is everything all right?" His voice was kind, but his eyes carried doubt. I forced a smile. "I was not the one confused, Henry. Someone used my name. I saw her with my own eyes." He nodded slowly, tugging at his leash. Of course. You just take care of yourself, all right?" And then he walked away, quickening his pace as though even listening to me too long might stain his reputation. That afternoon I went to church. Normally the sanctuary was my refuge, the soft glow of candles, the choir's voices lifting like prayer itself. But that day I felt eyes following me down the aisle. Pitying eyes, whispering lips. "She's the one from the airport. Poor thing, she's slipping." I clutched Ernest's locket at my neck, praying for strength, but even the hymns seemed muted. My voice cracked when I tried to sing. Later, when I arrived at Daniel's apartment, pleading for comfort, I was met with Sophia's carefully staged cruelty. She stood in the doorway, one hand resting on her hip, her tone dripping with false concern. "Elizabeth," she said sweetly, "I heard what happened. Everyone did. You must be exhausted. Maybe you should rest. In a facility. Just until you feel better." Her words pierced me deeper than any blade. A facility. She wanted me locked away, removed neatly from their lives like dust swept from a floor. And worst of all, Daniel didn't stop her. He stood behind her, his face pale, his eyes downcast. He didn't defend me, he didn't reach for me, he only murmured, "Mom, maybe Sophia's right. You've been under stress. Maybe some rest would help." In that instant, I felt the earth give way beneath me. The boy I had raised, the man I had sacrificed everything for, was beginning to believe the lie. The humiliation at home was sharp, but what Sophia prepared next was far worse because it was public. 2 nights later, Daniel and Sophia hosted a dinner with colleagues from the airline. Against my better judgment, I went. I told myself it was a chance to see my son, to show him I was still steady, still the mother who had once carried his dreams. The apartment shimmered with candlelight and expensive wine. Laughter floated across the table, polished and false. I carried a small dish of Ernest's old recipe roast lamb with rosemary, the kind Daniel had always loved. When I entered, Sophia's eyes flickered, and I knew then I had walked into a trap. She greeted me warmly, too warmly. "Elizabeth, you made it. Everyone, this is Daniel's mother." The guests smiled politely, lifting their glasses. I felt hope stir until Sophia added with a laugh, "Be patient with her. She's been having forgetful days." The laughter that followed sliced deeper than knives. I froze, the dish trembling in my hands. "That is not true," I said softly, my voice nearly drowned by the chatter. "I remember everything." Sophia tilted her head, her tone dripping with mockery. "Of course you do. Like at the airport, you remember shouting at strangers about being replaced." Gasps and chuckles rippled across the room. Daniel's face reddened. He shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. "Nothing." One of his colleagues muttered, "That's rough. Poor Captain Carter having to deal with this at home." Heat burned up my neck, shame crawling across my skin. My knees felt weak. I tried to steady myself, placing the dish on the table. "I cooked this for you, Daniel. The recipe your father—" "Oh, careful, Elizabeth," Sophia exclaimed, suddenly interrupting. She rushed forward, grabbing the dish dramatically, though it hadn't slipped. "We don't want another accident, do we?" Her words twisted the room into laughter again, as though my very existence was a mistake waiting to happen. I looked at Daniel. My son. My pride. He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my eyes, murmuring, "Only Mom, maybe you should sit down." And in that moment I felt smaller than I had in my entire life. Sophia smiled across the table, victorious. She had turned me into a spectacle. The laughter echoed long after it stopped. It clung to my skin, seared into my ears. I sat stiff at the end of the table, hands folded in my lap, the dish of lamb untouched before them all. I could feel eyes sliding toward me, curious, pitying, entertained. My son said nothing. Daniel's silence was worse than any insult. He poured wine for his colleagues, forced a smile, and let Sophia's words stand unchallenged. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry. The candlelight blurred as tears pressed at the corners of my eyes. I excused myself, quietly pushing back my chair, the scrape loud in the hush that followed. Already leaving, Sophia asked sweetly, her tone bright enough for everyone to hear. Perhaps it's past your bedtime. More laughter. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself, each step away from that table a wound. The corridor outside smelled of polished wood and expensive perfume. My own reflection in the mirror near the coat rack startled me. Shoulders hunched, eyes hollow, dignity cracked. Outside, the night was cold. I pulled Ernest's locket from beneath my blouse and held it tightly, as if his spirit could shield me from the storm. My breath trembled in the autumn air. For the first time, a thought struck me with chilling clarity. If I stay silent, they will bury me alive in lies. I walked the dark streets back to my little house, every step heavy, but something inside had hardened. The humiliation at church, the whispers from neighbors, the cruelty at the dinner table. It was no longer just Sophia's scheme. It was becoming everyone's truth. But truth, I reminded myself, is not decided by gossip. Truth is decided by proof. I laid the crumpled boarding pass on my nightstand beside Ernest's photo. His kind eyes looked back at me from the frame, and I whispered, "They think I'm weak. They think I'm confused. But you know me. You know I won't stop." The house was silent, but in that silence my resolve took root. I would not be erased. I would not be locked away. If Sophia wanted a war, then war is what she would get. The morning after the dinner, I woke with my throat raw and my eyes swollen from sleeplessness. The humiliation replayed again and again. Sophia's sweetly poisoned words, the laughter of strangers, Daniel's silence. But as I stared at the crumpled boarding pass on my nightstand, one truth hardened in me. If I did not fight back now, I would lose more than dignity. I would lose myself. So I put on my best coat, smoothed my graying hair, and walked into the police station. The sergeant at the front desk barely looked up until I laid the boarding pass on the counter. "Ma'am, how can I help you? My name is Elizabeth Carter," I said, forcing my voice steady. "Someone boarded a plane under my name. This pass is proof. I want it investigated." He frowned, taking the paper. His eyes flicked over the print, then back to me. "This looks legitimate." "It is," I pressed. "But I never bought it. I never boarded that plane. Someone is impersonating me." For the first time in weeks, I felt strength rising in my chest as I spoke. Each word was a brick rebuilding the foundation Sophia had tried to shatter. The sergeant called an officer from the fraud division. Together they examined the ticket-checking serial codes, scanning barcodes, their brows furrowed. "This was purchased online with a prepaid card." "Hard to trace," the officer muttered. "But if you're telling the truth, Mrs. Carter, then this is identity fraud. Serious business. Identity fraud." The words rang like salvation. At last, someone believed me. They asked me to sit to give a statement. I described everything. The boarding pass I found in Daniel's desk, the scene at the airport, the woman who looked like me disappearing into the jet bridge. As I spoke, their pens scratched rapidly across the forms. For the first time, I saw my nightmare transformed into ink on official paper. My story was no longer a ghost, it was evidence. When I left the station, the sunlight felt sharper, almost defiant. I held the copy of my statement against my chest, proof that I wasn't confused, proof that I wasn't crazy. But as I turned the corner, I froze. Across the street, leaning against a car, was Sophia. Her arms crossed, her lips curled into the faintest smirk. She lifted her phone slowly, deliberately, and snapped a photo of me walking out of the station. My stomach dropped. She wasn't afraid. She was watching, always watching. The following day, the phone rang. My hands shook as I answered, half expecting it to be Daniel, half dreading Sophia's voice. But instead, it was Officer Miller from the fraud division. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "we've reviewed airport surveillance. You need to come in." I hurried to the precinct, clutching Ernest's locket like a talisman. The officers ushered me into a small room with a flickering monitor. On the screen, grainy footage played the boarding gate passengers filing through. And then her. A woman with my height, my dark coat, my handbag. Her hair pulled back exactly as mine had been that morning. She handed over a passport and ticket, smiled faintly, and walked toward the jet bridge. "That's her," I gasped. "That's the imposter." Officer Miller nodded. "Look closely." He tapped the screen, zooming in as she shifted to the side. For a brief second, another figure entered the frame. A woman in a pale silk blouse head turned toward the imposter. Her face was harder to see, but her profile. My stomach clenched. It was Sophia. She was there at the gate moments before the double boarded. My knees weakened. I gripped the edge of the desk to stay upright. "You see, it's her. She's behind this." The officer scribbled notes. "It suggests collusion, but we'll need more concrete evidence before pressing charges. Fake identities require preparation, passports, bank cards, digital trails. Whoever did this planned carefully." I pressed my palms together, whispering, "She planned it. She's been planning all along." Walking home afterward, the world looked sharper, colder. The trees lining the street swayed in the wind, their shadows stretching long like hands trying to pull me under. When I reached my porch, an envelope waited on the step. No stamp, no name. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single photograph, blurry but clear enough. It was me leaving the police station that morning. On the back, scrawled in neat handwriting, were 3 words: "Stop or disappear." My breath caught. I clutched the photo so tightly it wrinkled. Somewhere nearby, unseen eyes were watching. I whispered into the wind, "You will not break me." But my hands shook all the way inside. I locked the door behind me, my back pressed to the wood as though it could keep the threat at bay. The photo still trembled in my hands. "Stop or disappear." For a moment I felt the old fear surge, my heart racing, my breath shallow, the memory of laughter at the dinner table and whispers at church pressing down on me like stones. They wanted me silent. They wanted me erased. But then I looked at the folder the police had given me. Inside was the copy of my statement, still crisp, and a flash drive with the airport footage. Proof. For the first time, proof. I carried it to the kitchen and laid it on the table beside Ernest's photo. His steady eyes met mine even through glass and decades. "You always told me," I whispered, "that truth is heavier than lies, but it can still float if we carry it together." I wiped my tears and picked up the phone. My hands no longer shook. I dialed the number of an old friend, Margaret, a retired lawyer who had once shared coffee with me every Thursday. "Margaret," I said, my voice low but steady, "I need help. Someone is impersonating me. I have the proof, and I won't be silent any longer." Her pause was brief, then firm. "Bring everything to me. If they want to fight, we'll bring it to court." The words filled me with a strength I hadn't felt in months. That night I didn't hide the boarding pass anymore. I pinned it to the wall above my desk, a reminder of the battle ahead. Every time I walked past, I looked at it not with fear, but with fire. Sophia could whisper to neighbors. She could twist Daniel's heart. She could even plant doubles in airports and photographs on my porch. But now I had something stronger than her lies. I had evidence. And I swore to myself as I turned off the light and the house sank into silence, I would take that evidence into the courtroom. I would speak until my voice broke, and the world would see which of us was the liar. The courthouse loomed above me like a stone giant, its columns rising into a gray sky heavy with clouds. I clutched my folder against my chest, my statement, the boarding pass, the surveillance stills, proof that I was not confused, proof that I still existed. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and old paper. Every step of my shoes echoed too loudly on the marble floor. People stared as I passed, their whispers darting like insects. I held my head high, though my knees threatened to buckle. When I entered the courtroom, I saw her. Sophia. She sat at the defense table, her silk blouse pristine, her hair swept back in a flawless twist. Her lips curved into the faintest smile as her eyes locked on mine. She was radiant, but her beauty was a mask stretched over venom. Daniel sat beside her, his face pale, his jaw clenched. He avoided my eyes, staring instead at his folded hands. My heart ached. He looked like the little boy I once cradled, lost inside the uniform of a man. The judge entered, robes, flowing gavel cracking against wood. Court is in session. The opening statements blurred past me, a tide of words about fraud and identity theft. My pulse roared louder than any argument. Finally, Officer Miller was called. He stood before the court, the surveillance footage projected on a screen. Grainy images filled the room, the boarding gate passengers filing through, and then the woman. My double. Gasps rippled through the benches. The imposter moved with my posture, my stride, even the way I adjusted my handbag strap. "That is not Mrs. Carter," Officer Miller declared, his voice steady. "The real Mrs. Carter was documented elsewhere at the time. This indicates deliberate impersonation." My breath caught as the camera zoomed there just for a moment. Sophia's profile turned toward the double, her lips moving as though giving instructions. Murmurs erupted. The judge raised a hand for silence. Sophia's lawyer leapt to his feet. "Objection. That image is inconclusive, mere resemblance." But I saw her eyes then, Sophia's eyes, and for the first time her mask cracked. Just for a second, panic flickered. I rose slowly from my seat, the folder trembling in my hand. My voice carried across the room, raw but unbroken. That woman took my name. And the one who sent her sits right there. All eyes turned to Sophia. The silence was a blade, sharp and waiting. The air in the courtroom grew dense after my words, as though every breath carried the weight of judgment. All eyes fixed on Sophia. For one fleeting heartbeat, her mask slipped, but then she laughed softly, a sound as smooth as silk yet sharp enough to slice. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm, almost pitying. "With all due respect, my mother-in-law has been unwell. These accusations are the result of her condition. She imagines conspiracies where none exist." The words dripped like poison disguised as compassion. Gasps fluttered through the room. I clenched the folder tighter, my nails biting into the cardboard. Sophia gestured gracefully toward me. "She claims someone has stolen her identity, yet she admits she never boarded that flight. Perhaps she found an old ticket, perhaps she mistook another passenger for herself. We must have sympathy, not condemnation." Her lawyer seized the moment. "Exactly, Your Honor. My client is a devoted daughter-in-law who has cared for Mrs. Carter tirelessly. This case is nothing more than a tragic misunderstanding fueled by age and stress." I wanted to scream, to tear through their web of lies, but before I could speak, Sophia turned, her eyes locking on Daniel. "Darling," she whispered, just loud enough for the court to hear, "you know your mother has been struggling. Tell them." Daniel shifted in his seat, his face pale, torn between blood and vows. His lips parted. "Mom," his voice cracked, "maybe you should rest. This is hurting you." The words struck like a hammer. I staggered, my knees threatening to buckle. My son, the boy I had raised, the man I had defended all my life, was being used as Sophia's shield. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Some nodded at Sophia's performance, others looked at me with pity. I felt their judgment pressing down heavy and suffocating. I forced myself to stand tall, though my heart was breaking. "I am not confused," I said, my voice trembling but clear. "I am not imagining this. The proof is right there on the screen. And the truth will not vanish just because she wants it silenced." But Sophia only smiled, tilting her head like a queen entertaining a child's tantrum. And in that moment I understood she wasn't just defending herself. She was turning the court itself into another stage for my humiliation. The judge's gavel struck once, silencing the murmurs. "Order in the court." I stood there, my chest heaving, my voice trembling but unbroken, yet I could feel the tide against me. Sophia's lies draped the room like velvet, suffocating, convincing. Even my son's silence felt like a verdict. Just when despair threatened to swallow me, the courtroom door creaked open. A young officer entered, clutching a folder. He walked briskly to the judge and whispered something. The judge's brows lifted slightly before he nodded. "Proceed." The officer stepped forward, holding up a series of photographs, grainy stills pulled from a security camera. "This footage," he said firmly, "was taken from Gate 12 30 minutes before boarding. It shows the defendant, Mrs. Sophia Carter, walking alongside the impersonator in question. They exchange documents before the imposter enters the line of passengers." Gasps filled the room. The photographs were passed to the judge, then to the lawyers. On the screen above, the image flickered into view, Sophia, her unmistakable profile sharp against the blur of the terminal, her hand extended toward the woman who looked like me. I felt my knees weaken, but this time not from despair, from hope. Sophia's mask cracked. She shifted in her seat, her knuckles white against the table. For the first time, her perfect smile faltered. Her lawyer scrambled. This could be misinterpreted. A chance encounter. But the officer cut in, his voice steady. "The timestamp matches the purchase records of the fraudulent ticket. This is no accident." The judge leaned forward, his gaze heavy on Sophia. "You will have the chance to respond, but this evidence is admissible." The courtroom erupted with whispers, the air electric. I pressed Ernest Lockett to my chest, tears blurring my vision. For weeks I had been mocked, humiliated, erased, and now for the first time the scales tipped. I looked across the room at Daniel. His eyes, wide and glistening, flicked between me and the screen. His lips parted as though he wanted to speak, but no words came. Sophia lowered her head, her jaw tight. For once, she had no rehearsed line, no poisoned sweetness, only silence. And in that silence I felt the faintest tremor of victory. The courtroom was no longer silent. It pulsed with whispers, shock, the crackling energy of truth finally breaking through lies. I stood with my hands gripping the table, my breath uneven. On the screen above, Sophia's image stared back at the whole room, elegant, poised, unmistakably handing something to the woman who had worn my face. The judge's gavel struck again. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice firm, "you will answer these allegations." Sophia rose slowly, smoothing her skirt as though she still controlled the stage. But I saw the stiffness in her movements, the tension in her jaw. She turned toward the judge, her voice laced with desperate elegance. "Your Honor, I was simply helping a stranger. She said she had lost her documents. I didn't know her. I didn't know what she intended to do." Her lawyer nodded furiously. "Exactly. A coincidence, nothing more." But the judge's eyes were sharp. "And yet the documents she carried bore your mother-in-law's name." Sophia faltered, her lips tightening. For the first time she had no ready smile. I looked at Daniel. His face was pale, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. "Mom," he whispered, barely audible. Then louder to Sophia, "Tell me the truth. Did you do this?" The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Sophia's eyes darted her mask, slipping further. "Daniel," she hissed, her voice low but sharp enough for us all to hear, "don't let her manipulate you. She's always wanted to drive us apart." "No." Daniel's voice cracked, filled with anguish. "You're the one who—" He stopped, his eyes flicking to me, tears brimming. "All this time?" I thought she was confused. "But it was you." Gasps rippled across the benches. Sophia stiffened her hands, curling into fists. "Mr. Carter," the judge said sternly, "control yourself. The court will render its verdict based on evidence, not emotion." But the damage was done. The mask Sophia had worn so perfectly was crumbling piece by piece in front of everyone, including Daniel. The prosecutor rose. "Your Honor, we have presented clear evidence of impersonation, identity fraud, and collusion. The victim, Mrs. Elizabeth Carter, has endured not only deception but public humiliation, orchestrated by the defendant. We request full charges and immediate protective measures." Protective measures. The word struck me with a strange mix of relief and sorrow. At last, someone recognized the danger I had lived under. And as I sank back into my seat, clutching Ernest's locket, I felt tears slip down my cheeks, not of defeat but of justice, finally within reach. The gavel struck once more, its echo heavy as thunder. "This court," the judge announced, "finds sufficient evidence to proceed with charges of identity fraud and attempted coercion. The defendant, Mrs. Sophia Carter, is hereby remanded to custody pending trial." Gasps exploded across the courtroom. The sound washed over me like a wave. My hands trembled on the wooden bench, my breath ragged. For weeks I had been painted as unstable, senile, confused, and now the truth stood in the open, undeniable. Sophia shot to her feet, her composure shattering like glass. "No," she screamed, her voice sharp, raw, stripped of the sweetness she had worn like armor. "This is a setup. She's lying. That old woman has poisoned you all." The bailiff stepped closer, but Sophia turned toward Daniel, her eyes blazing. "Daniel, tell them. Tell them I did this for us, for our future. Don't you dare let her ruin everything." Daniel buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook, his voice breaking through sobs. "You ruined it yourself, Sophia. You ruined everything." The courtroom buzzed with whispers, the crowd leaning forward to catch every word. I felt tears stream down my face, but they were not tears of weakness, they were tears of release. The judge banged the gavel again. "Order." Sophia twisted her hair, tumbling loose, her eyes wild now, no longer the polished queen she had pretended to be. "You think you've won, Elizabeth?" she spat, her voice echoing across the chamber. "You're nothing but a relic, a burden. Without me, Daniel would still be nothing." Her words cut, but they also revealed her true self to everyone. Every mask she had worn shattered. "Remove her," the judge ordered. The bailiff seized her arms. She struggled, her shrieks filling the chamber. "You'll regret this. All of you, especially you, old woman." I closed my eyes, clutching Ernest's locket, her voice still seared, but I no longer trembled. When I opened them again, I saw Daniel staring at me, his face streaked with tears. He looked broken, like a man who had just watched his entire life collapse in a single hour. I wanted to reach for him, to hold him, to whisper that love could survive even this, but between us lay an ocean of betrayal and grief. The court recessed. The benches emptied. I sat alone in the quiet, the weight of victory and sorrow pressing down in equal measure. When the gavel struck for the final time, its sound seemed to settle deep into my bones. "This court recognizes Mrs. Elizabeth Carter as the sole victim in this case," the judge declared. "Evidence supports the charge of identity fraud. The defendant will remain in custody until her trial date. Furthermore, protective measures are to be granted to Mrs. Carter immediately." Protective measures. Words that felt like a shield finally placed around me after months of being stripped bare. I pressed Ernest's locket against my chest and let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. Across the room, Sophia thrashed against the bailiffs, her face twisted with fury. No trace of the polished elegance remained. She spat venom with every word, her voice hoarse. "You think this is over, old woman. You'll pay for humiliating me, Daniel. Don't let her destroy us." But Daniel didn't move. He sat, slumped, his hands covering his face. Only when Sophia was dragged screaming from the chamber did he finally lift his eyes to me. For the first time in years, I saw my son without her shadow cast over him. His eyes were red, broken, the boy I had raised, flickering through the cracks of the man he had become. "Mom." His voice cracked, weak as a child's. "I'm so sorry." Tears welled in my eyes, but I held myself steady. I wanted to reach for him, to embrace him, to wipe away the guilt spilling down his cheeks. But the gulf between us was too wide, carved by months of betrayal, by wounds words could not yet heal. "Truth has its price, Daniel," I whispered. "And we are all paying it now." The courtroom emptied. Strangers passed me with nods, some with sympathy, some with awe, as though I were both a caution and a victory. But all I felt was hollow. When I stepped outside, the autumn air struck my face, cool and biting. The courthouse steps stretched before me, and beyond them, the restless city hummed, unaware of the war that had been waged inside. I stood there for a long moment, clutching my locket, staring at the clouds parting to reveal a sliver of sunlight. Justice had been served. My name was no longer a stain. But justice had come at a cost, the ruins of my own family. And as I descended the stone steps, the echo of Sophia's last scream still clinging to my ears, I knew this story was not over. Weeks passed after the trial, yet the echoes of that courtroom still haunted me. Some nights I woke to the sound of Sophia's shriek in my dreams, her threats clawing through the silence. Other nights, it was Daniel's broken voice whispering, "Mom, I'm sorry." The world outside carried on as though nothing had changed. The buses still rattled down Main Street, children still played hopscotch on the sidewalks, the church bells still chimed at noon. But inside me, everything had shifted. I had fought a war not with fists or weapons, but with truth. And truth, though heavy, had carried me through. Daniel came to visit one evening. He stood on my porch, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets, his eyes shadowed with regret. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I looked at him, my son, the boy who once built paper airplanes at my kitchen table, now a man broken by the lies he chose to believe. My heart ached, but I laid my hand on his cheek. "Forgiveness isn't about what you deserve, Daniel. It's about what I can live with. And I cannot live without hope." Tears slipped down his face, and he leaned into my touch like a child again. Inside over dinner, the silence was softer than it had been in months. He told me about his work, about how empty the apartment felt without Sophia's presence. His voice trembled when he spoke of Matthew, my grandson, asking why his mother was gone. "I told him she went away for a long time," Daniel whispered, "but he asked me if you would leave too." I didn't know how to answer. I reached across the table, took his hand, and said firmly, "Tell him no. Tell him I will always be here." The relief in his eyes was a balm I hadn't known I needed. That night, after he left, I sat by the window with Ernest's locket in my hand. The stars shone faintly above the rooftops. For the first time in months, I felt the ache in my chest ease. Justice had not healed everything. Scars remained scars that would ache with every memory of betrayal, but they were my scars, proof that I had survived. And survival, I realized, is its own kind of victory. In the weeks that followed, word of my case spread beyond our small town. Neighbors who once whispered about my confusion now knocked on my door with quiet apologies. Some brought pies, others simply lowered their heads and murmured, "We should have believed you." But I didn't need their pity. What I needed was to make sure no one else would be erased the way I had almost been. So I began to write. At first, it was only in an old notebook, the same one I once used to track Sophia's strange comings and goings. I wrote down every detail of my battle, the lies, the humiliation, the photo on my doorstep, the gavel that finally cleared my name. It was painful, like reopening wounds, but I knew it was necessary. Soon, I found myself speaking at the church basement on Thursday nights. Women gathered there, widows, grandmothers, mothers, abandoned by the very children they had sacrificed for. I read from my notes, my voice trembling at first, then stronger. "You are not invisible," I told them. "You are not crazy, and you are never too old to fight for the truth." Their eyes filled with tears. Some nodded, some gripped my hands with desperate gratitude, and for the first time I saw my suffering reflected in others not as isolation but as solidarity. With the help of Margaret, my old friend the lawyer, I started something bigger, a small community group we called the Carter Foundation for Truth. It wasn't much, just a borrowed office above the library, a few donated chairs, a kettle for tea. But soon letters began to arrive from beyond the county. Stories of betrayal. Stories of mothers tricked into signing away homes, of grandmothers mocked until their voices broke, of families who turned their backs when money and pride were at stake. Each letter tore at me but also stitched me back together, because now my pain had purpose. One evening after a meeting, a frail widow clutched my hand with trembling fingers. Her son had stolen her savings, called her insane when she tried to speak up. Tears streaked her face as she whispered, "They'll never believe me." I squeezed her hand and looked her straight in the eye. "I believe you, and I will help you prove it. You are not alone." In her gaze, I saw myself, the woman I had been just months ago, and in helping her, I began to heal myself. 5 months have passed since the day Sophia was led away in handcuffs, her voice echoing with venom. 5 months since the gavel struck and my name was cleared. Life has not returned to what it was. No, it never will. Betrayal leaves scars too deep to fade, but those scars remind me that I survived. Daniel visits more often now. He brings Matthew, my grandson, whose laughter fills the empty corners of my house. Sometimes when I watch them play in the yard, I feel a tenderness I thought had been buried under rubble. My son is broken, yes, but he is trying, and perhaps that is enough. The Carter Foundation has grown beyond my imagination. What began as a desk in a borrowed office has become a beacon for women who thought they were alone. Letters pour in from across the state, stories of betrayal and survival. Each voice adds to a chorus that can no longer be silenced. Sometimes I sit by my window at dusk, the locket warm in my hand, and I whisper to Ernest's memory. They tried to erase me, but instead they gave me a louder voice. And now I turn to you, whoever you are, wherever you are listening. What would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed silent, letting whispers bury you alive? Or would you have stood trembling but unbroken to demand the truth? I want to hear your story, because every comment, every shared voice is another candle in the darkness. Do not forget to stay with me on this journey. Subscribe, leave your thoughts below, and share this story so that others may find the strength to fight for themselves. Because in the end, betrayal may wound us, but it will never define us. Only courage will.